As it said on the screen, Ukrainian violence not letting up. Taras Kuzio, Canadian Institute for Ukrainian Studies, will be part of a panel tonight, and he's here. And Marta Czurylowicz, Ukrainian election observer, is here. Let's start with your experience, Marta. You were in the western part of Ukraine, so you didn't see that kind of thing happening on the streets. What was your experience like, and some conclusions you might have come to?
Well, I was in Ivano-Frankivsk, so that's the one of the western oblasts in Ukraine, and for the most part, everything went very smoothly. There was no violence whatsoever. It was very much a community sort of feel. Everyone was excited to be able to vote, so it was very positive and enthusiastic from the people. But
I'm sure quite concerned about what was happening in the other part of the country.
Oh, definitely, yeah. We actually had our driver and our interpreter. Our driver was from Donetsk, one of the drivers that was with our group, and his family was quite concerned for his safety, because what they're hearing on the eastern part of Ukraine is a lot different than what the western part of Ukraine is actually doing. So they were worried for his safety, which was kind of weird.
Sure, and it would appear, we've talked to other observers on the show as well, that everyone feels that the election was held legitimately and went off as well as it could.
Yeah, everything went perfectly. The polling station that I went to, they were following the laws of Ukraine word for word and showing us, and very, very cooperative.
All right, so then Taras, the election took place. Now there's a new leader, but it's still a horrible situation.
Yes, and he was elected on the basis of that he could deal with the situation relatively quickly. This is something that people want to believe, that the conflict can be resolved in a matter of weeks, shall we say. I think they're going to be very disillusioned quickly, because I don't think that this conflict is going to end with one side winning and the other side being defeated so quickly, especially because you've got a neighbor next door that is in effect supporting terrorism in a neighboring country.
Well, is there more than one side? I mean, there's kind of Ukrainians who want to be Ukrainian. There are rebels within the country, and then there's Russia. Mm-hmm. So,
well, there's about 2 or 3 sides. There's the support for the terrorists, rebels, separatists, however you want to call them, is done on the one hand covertly by Russia. Russia is playing a game with the West. It's saying it's pulling its troops from the border. At the same time, it's sending in covert proxy forces inside Ukraine. But there's also domestic support from the former president, Mr. Yanukovych, right, and his cabal of friends. They're also funding some of the terrorists, because they want to do this out of revenge, out of anger that they were overthrown a few months ago by the revolution in Kiev. So it's a mixture of things. The majority of the population don't necessarily support the terrorists, but they also don't support the authorities in Kiev, because they're angry that it was their president that was overthrown. Yeah. So their passivity helps the terrorists on the ground. Because the security forces from Kiev are not getting local support.
But Marta, over on the western side where you were, you said everyone was excited to have the election. Were they optimistic about the future of their country?
I mean, I'd like to say that they were hopeful and that they were optimistic, but again, they're just sort of trying to get things going as quickly as possible, and so they're more anxious and nervous. They want to be hopeful, like they want to be optimistic, but it's very bittersweet.
Is it splitting families?
I wouldn't say so, no.
No? Is it in the eastern part?
In the eastern part it is to some degree, or at least splitting neighbors. Yeah. We've had that in the Balkans and elsewhere, where one neighbor supports the Russian cause, the other neighbor's a Ukrainian patriot. But I visited eastern Ukraine, a province just to the west of where the conflict is. I mean, this conflict is very localized. There are eight Russian-speaking regions in eastern and southern Ukraine. The conflict is happening in 2 of them. So it's not a civil war, it's not a massive conflict, it's contained. The Ukrainian forces are a bit incompetent because they're not really trained for this counterinsurgency. You need kind of Delta SAS type of forces, which Ukraine doesn't really have. But they do seem to be making some progress. The West needs to be a bit more critical and not pretend that Russia's not involved.
Well-
you know, I mean, a full-scale Russian invasion, in some ways, would be better because then we can see.
You'd know who to fight.
You know, the fight.
Yeah, all right. Maybe Ukraine doesn't have those special forces. The United States does. Europe does. They keep offering help, but is that help ever going to be, as they say, boots on the ground?
Well, not when we have the president we have in the United States. Even if it was another Democrat, Bill or Hillary Clinton, never mind, say, McCain as president of the US, we would have had military equipment already in Ukraine. Obama simply is not interested in that kind of thing. He doesn't want to fight with Putin. Putin knows that. The Europeans, on the other hand, are even worse in many ways because they are either bought out because of capital that's fled to places like London. They're tied in with the energy sector into Russia. So they're even less inclined to promote sanctions. I mean, I think Canada here should be trying to push the American side into providing some kind of military equipment. There is a concern that when this equipment, if it was to arrive in Ukraine, would it not get lost?
No.
Would it kind of
End up in the wrong hands?
wrong hands? I mean, so you might need more severe controls on the ground. But to be honest, besides equipment, they need trainers.
Yeah.
People to train these guys.
Running out of time here, so for anyone who's in Toronto or very close and would have the chance, you have a panel tonight. When and where?
6:30 to 8:30 in the Monk Centre at the University of Toronto. It's a panel of 5 people on the outcome of the Ukraine elections.
Good to have both of you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, staying